All right, today we're going to start with a couple videos that Israel released yesterday showing their forces securing and extracting 3 hostages from the Nuseirat area of the central Gaza Strip. This first video here is helmet cam footage showing Merjan, Andrei Kozlov, and Shlomi Ziv being secured by Israeli forces at what they say was the home of Abdallah al-Jamal, the current journalist working for a U.S.-based nonprofit in Gaza who was previously affiliated with Al Jazeera, and more on that here in a second. The second video, shifting over to this one, shows those same hostages, or previous hostages, now having been rescued, being loaded in the back of an Israeli helicopter, taking off, flying to an Israeli hospital where they were subsequently reunited with their families.
2,000 feet over Syria.
תראה, יחסית פשוט, כמו אוטו. בן גוריון, אתה יכול לראות את המסלולים שם הארוכים, המסלולים של נתב"ג. אתם הולכים לתל השומר, אני מניח ששם תהיה לכם קבלת פנים. שוף אחד שיחליט את אחד הלוחמים לפנינו, אז אנחנו נחד בתל השומר. כל הכבוד לכם. הדבר הכי חשוב בעולם.
Now, there's a lot of information still continuing to come out around the nature of this operation, the casualties, where they were being held, who was holding them, etc. I do want to start with the accusation that 3 of them were being held in the home of Abdallah al-Jamal. I've not seen anything new on that front at all. Doesn't mean it isn't out there. I just haven't come across anything. At this point, what we have is Israel saying that he was holding at least 3 of the hostages, and we saw that he was putting out content, writing during the course of the last few weeks, supposedly while these hostages were there in his home. Al Jazeera has said that he's not affiliated with the organization, which technically appears to be true. It looks like in the past he was a freelancer for the organization. But when you see that video, the Israeli forces are on and off the objective very, very quick. It doesn't look like they brought any prisoners with them to question. I don't know if there were any pictures or videos taken from inside of the house to confirm whose residence it actually was. So, that's a big claim that a journalist actively writing about the ongoing war in Gaza is currently holding hostages in his home. I've not seen a lot of definitive evidence come out one way or the other since the initial claims were made a couple days ago. Now, another item that's getting a lot of attention following the 4 hostages being secured and brought back to Israel are the Palestinian casualties. And there's a big issue here that we need to address, and it's that we don't have any number for the Hamas militants killed during the course of the operation, which is important, no matter what that number is, because it's going to skew how this operation is viewed. It's a critical aspect that just is not available. And that shouldn't be a shock, because from day one of this war, Hamas has never released when any of their fighters have been killed, so it's not surprising at all that they wouldn't release it here. The most recent numbers that I've seen is from Al Jazeera saying that 274 Palestinians were killed and 698 wounded during the course of this operation, which are significant numbers, right up there close to 1,000 casualties in total. And the way that that's being presented is it sounds like all civilians. Now, if you were to present this operation as 4 hostages were secured and rescued and 1,000 civilians were killed or wounded, that skews the conversation pretty far in one direction, right? That seems overly reckless. But if you find out that some percentage of them were militants, it might change how this is viewed. Now, according to Al Jazeera, they say that 64 of those killed were children, 57 were women, and 37 were elderly. That rough math means that around 116 remain to be military-aged males and or Hamas militants. All right, I want to stress that not every 25-year-old male in Gaza is a armed Hamas militant. That's not a claim to make, but it suggests that around 80, 100, maybe 70 were fighters actively participating in this engagement. I mean, we know there was shooting, we know there was fighting. The IDF talked about the intense bombardment when they came out of the homes. They lost troops. They had multiple troops wounded during the course of this operation. So somebody was clearly shooting at them. But what we don't know from looking at the reports coming through Al Jazeera and from the Gaza Ministry of Health is, were there 5 militants killed or 116 or more, right? And lacking that information really kind of leaves us with a significant gap in trying to assess how effective this operation was. Now, we do have some updates from the hostages who have started to do a few brief interviews and some talking with doctors, kind of explaining their situation while in captivity. The doctor said that they're in a worse physical and psychological state than initially believed. And the Khan public broadcaster on Sunday said that after initial conversations with the four, medical professionals noted that the rescued hostages spoke about awful experiences they had been subjected to while in captivity, saying that the captors also cared about their well-being, which is this kind of yin and yang of this whole experience, right? It's not good to ever be held in captivity. Nobody ever wants to be a hostage. Just the nature of that happening is going to be traumatic and awful. But at the same time, it shouldn't be all that shocking that Hamas wants to keep their hostages alive. This is their major bargaining chip. They for the most part, I would assume that they don't want them to die. They want them to be there so they can trade them out for some sort of negotiations around this war. Channel 13 reported on Sunday that Ziv said he had learned Arabic from Al Jazeera broadcasts he watched in captivity every day, and that the captors had made him read the Quran and pray every day. And then one of the hostages said she'd been held in 4 different apartments during her 8 months in captivity, and in the last location, her family made her wash their dishes and cook. So that kind of, again, kind of sounds like slave labor almost in a way, but it sounds like, from what we're hearing from these different hostages, they were all engaged with the family members, right? It's not like they were held in some dark dungeon where nobody saw them. They were, praying with the family, watching Al Jazeera with the family. They were cooking or cleaning up after the family that was there. So they were visible to at least a handful of people in Gaza. Now, Hamas, turning to their activity in the Gaza Strip, they've claimed responsibility for 22 attacks across the Gaza Strip in the last 3 days, including 3 surface-to-air missiles they say they fired against Israeli helicopters. At least one of those was during the course of this hostage rescue operation. Doesn't appear that any of those were successful and actually hit Israeli helicopters. Hamas also says they detonated 2 booby-trapped homes, or house-borne IEDs, homes rigged with explosive devices, which is becoming a bigger and bigger issue for the IDF as they move across Gaza. Hamas on their Telegram channel said they detonated a booby-trapped house inside of which a Zionist force was holed up in the city of Rafah, leaving members of the force dead and wounded. Immediately upon the arrival of the rescue force, our Mujahideen destroyed the surroundings of the house that was blown up with mortar shells. So destroying the house, and then when the rescue force arrived, whether it was maneuver elements or medevac, they were attacked as well. Now, a lot of times we get these Hamas claims and then nothing from the IDF. The IDF does not address everything Hamas puts out just because it's a lot and it's hard to pinpoint exactly what that is and where it took place. In this case, Israel overnight announced that 4 of their soldiers had been killed in a blast by a booby-trapped building in Rafah, which seems to line up with the event that Hamas is describing here. According to the IDF probe, they said the troops had thrown an explosive inside of a suspicious home in Rafah in an attempt to trigger any potential traps and entered after there was no immediate blast. So they for some reason, thought there might be charges inside. IEDs rigged inside. They threw a charge inside to try to detonate any of those. It didn't go off. And then when they did go in, the 3-story building exploded, causing parts to collapse on some of the soldiers. Inside of the home, after they were clearing out the rubble and evacuating the soldiers, Israel says they found a tunnel shaft indicating that the building likely belonged to someone in the Hamas organization. In addition to the 4 fallen soldiers, Israel said that another 7 were wounded, including 5 seriously. Now, shifting to the United Nations, who held a vote yesterday on a ceasefire plan aimed at ending the war in Gaza. 14 out of 15 of the Security Council members voted in favor of this U.S. drafted resolution. Russia abstained. They didn't veto, but they abstained. They said that after the vote, Russia said there was a lack of clarity over exactly what Israel had signed up to in the resolution, leaving too many questions unanswered for Moscow to offer its support. So it made its way through the Security Council, was not vetoed, but again, Russia abstained from voting. Now, this resolution says that Israel has already accepted the proposal, and it urges Hamas to do so. So very similar to the statements made by U.S. President Biden just over a week ago. Now, since this vote took place, Hamas has come out and publicly voiced opinion for the resolution, but moderators, as of this recording, said they have yet to receive any formal responses from Israel or Hamas related to this ceasefire proposal. A senior Israeli diplomat following this vote said, quote, "We will continue until all of the hostages are returned, until Hamas's military and governing capabilities are dismantled." That is very much in line with what they've said since day one of this war, and it appears to be a bit of a sticking point when looking at this specific ceasefire negotiation. Now, quick refresher of what this ceasefire proposal puts forward. Again, it's the same as U.S. President Biden put forward a little over a week ago. Phase 1 calls for an immediate, full, and complete ceasefire with the release of hostages, including women, the elderly, and the wounded, and the return of the remains of some hostages who have been killed and the exchange of Palestinian prisoners. It calls on the withdrawal of Israeli forces from populated areas of Gaza, so not a complete withdrawal, not in Phase 1, so that Palestinian civilians can return to their homes and facilitate the flow of humanitarian aid. Phase 2 then would see a permanent end to hostilities in exchange for the release of all other hostages in Gaza and a full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. That is one of the items that at this point appears to be a sticking point with Israel, and it's not clear that they've necessarily agreed to that. Phase 3 then is a multi-year reconstruction plan for Gaza, and then any deceased hostages still in the Strip would be returned to Israel. So again, as of this recording, it sounds like Hamas, as they mentioned over a week ago, are in favor of this. It's not clear that Israel is on board, and the mediators have said they haven't heard anything back formally from either one of the two parties. Now, a couple of days ago, the New York Times ran a pretty significant article alleging detainee abuse and torture at a prison inside of Israel holding suspects from Gaza. It's titled "Inside the Base Where Israel Has Detained Thousands of Gazans." And this is a very long article for what it's worth. I want to hit on kind of the high points here, but I'll link it in the description below if you want to give it the full read. They say in interviews, former detainees describe beatings and other abuse in the facility. A 3-month investigation by the New York Times based on interviews with former detainees and with Israeli military officers, doctors, and soldiers who served at the site to visit the site, and data released about detainees provided by the military found that the 1,200 Palestinian civilians who had been held at this site and then released by Israel, right? So Israel pulled them in at one point and through some questioning found out you're not actually affiliated with Hamas or you're not a militant. They sent them home. So those 1,200 that the New York Times says that they were able to talk to or view data on said that they were held in demeaning conditions without the ability to plead their case to a judge for up to 75 days. Detainees were also denied access to lawyers for up to 90 days, and their location is withheld from rights groups as well as from the International Committee of the Red Cross, in which some legal experts say is a contravention of international law. I don't have anything to say about that last part there. That's not good. None of this is good. A note on the challenges of dealing with prisoners in this type of situation, and it's something that we've struggled with in the United States as well. Guantanamo Bay is a great example, right? How do you treat what your country views as a terrorist, right? During an ongoing war, it's a subject of debate. That does not mean by a long shot that people should be denied access to lawyers or tortured or treated poorly or denied access to the Red Cross. Not at all. Simply that when viewing the prisoner situation during an ongoing war like this, where a nation is fighting what they view as a terrorist entity, it's not always best to apply the same standards you would when looking at, police action in a city in the United States. There's a lot of competing issues at play there that make this incredibly challenging. Now, Israel did push back on these claims. During the visit, senior military doctors said they have never observed any signs of torture, and commanders said that they tried to treat detainees as humanely as possible. They confirmed that at least 12 soldiers had been dismissed from their roles at the site, some of them for excessive use of force. The IDF put out a statement saying any abuse of detainees, whether during their detention or during interrogation, violates the law and the directives of the IDF, and as such is strictly prohibited. So again, pretty in-depth article with serious allegations from the New York Times. I'll link that in the description below if you want to check that out in its entirety. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if you're interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, which is linked in the description below. Just put out a recent article talking about Hezbollah in South America that I think is pretty interesting, along with ad-free, sponsor-free videos, some podcasts, weekly wrap-ups, audio articles, things like that. Again, linked in the description if interested. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.